Coming up today, it's time to look in Tinseltown. We haven't seen or heard from the Sparks much recently, but as they're getting ready to start a big stretch, what have they been doing under their new head coach? Was the decision to get rid of Derek Fisher correct? And will it even matter? This is the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast. Let's go.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, hello, and welcome. You are listening to Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm your host for this day's episode here on Tuesday, June 21st. This is Alex Simon. I'm a sports editor at the Bay Area News Group up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm pinch hitting today for Howard Megdal, our normal host here at Locked On Women's Basketball. We got to give Howard some breathers every now and then. He can play the full 40 minutes if we have to, but, to get him at his best, we want him to play just 38 or so minutes. I'll take a breather for him here or there. We've got Dave Yapkowitz. Dave, thanks for joining us, the Los Angeles Sparks beat writer, and we're going to get into the Sparks. But before we do that, Dave, I wanted to thank all of the listeners here for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And don't forget that Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms that you get your podcasts. And you can watch video of our podcast recording over on YouTube and see Dave's beautiful face. Dave, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Dave, it's kind of been a weird situation where the Sparks have only had 2 games in the last 2 weeks. What have you been doing with all this free time?
It's been a little strange there. Considering how schedule heavy, game heavy their early schedule was. Especially it seems like when they were alternating home away, they only had a couple home games. They were out on the road for most of that time. It seemed like they had a game every other day, and now they've kind of hit a slower patch of their schedule. It starts to pick up a little bit, but we did have, even though it was a slow time in terms of games, we had some pretty big news within the past 2 weeks. Some major news.
I was going to say, big is not even kind of encapsulating everything. When you decide to part ways with, slip of the tongue there, but part ways with your head coach and GM mutually, we should say, that's pretty important. And Derek Fisher, it was actually 2 weeks ago today on June 7th that Derek Fisher and the Sparks parted ways. I suspect, Dave, that is a move that, even in hindsight, feels like the moment of the season so far. Does it not?
Definitely. Yeah. I'd say that's been, the story of the season so far is that decision. And, I want to say that maybe it was surprising in the sense that it kind of happened in the middle of the season like that, and it was something that, maybe you kind of got the feeling that this was his year to really prove himself as head coach, considering, the moves they made, the players that they brought in, like this was kind of going to be a make or break year. And so, at least, my gut feeling was that, they may have, gone this season out, seen what happens, and at the end of the season is when, they may have make a decision on, what his future with the team. But, it just kind of happened real suddenly like that. And, there may have been a bit of, precedent for that, considering the Indiana Fever let go of their head coach, kind of just right before that, in season. So, maybe there was a bit of a precedent there. And it was just, they just had gotten off to such a disappointing start this year. And we can talk about the travel issues. We could talk about the lack of practice time because they were on the road so much. And when you're trying to put together, so many big pieces like that, and trying to just blend this new team together. But ultimately, coaching's kind of a results driven profession. And, regardless of what's going on the court there, regardless of, you look at the wins and losses, and ultimately, I feel like the coach is going to take the fall. And maybe, who knows? It was obviously, management, upper brass felt like it was time for a change.
Well, when they let go of Fisher, it was coming off of a 7-point loss to the Phoenix Mercury, where they were 5-7. But they were entering a stretch where basically from the day they fired him up until this past Sunday, June 19th, they would only have one game, and it was a home game against the Aces. It left a ton of practice time. They brought in Fred Williams, who, it should be noted, was very close with Liz Cambage when they were both in Dallas together in the past, and is seen as somebody who is brought in as a veteran of the WNBA, has coached at multiple stops in the WNBA, can kind of help right the ship. But in the 2 games since, they lost at home to the Aces pretty handily. And then just this past Sunday, in what is the first of 5 games in 9 days for the Sparks, after all this practice time, it's right back into a gauntlet. They went to Dallas and lost rather decisively, I would say, to the Wings. They were down by I think it was 16 points entering the third quarter. So for a team that made this move and had all this practice time, even with the new regime, it hasn't looked great for these first 2 results without Derek as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple key issues that keep coming up, that have been issues since the season began, and in these past 2 games they continue to be kind of glaring there. And I think one of them that I want to mention is defensively. That the past couple seasons, even last year with the team, decimated as they were with injuries last year, they were still among one of the league's elite on that side of the ball. And just the defense has really been, it's been a struggle for them this year, and they've had stretches where they put together some good defensive possessions, and they just can't seem to sustain that for an entire 40 minutes.
I will say, anytime you just actively make a decision to swap Erica Wheeler from your roster with Chennedy Carter, that's probably going to impact your defense a decent bit. Just got to throw that out there about that trade.
Yeah, and they, like I was saying too, they go through these stretches where, yeah, they'll look really good defensively, a few possessions in a row, but for some reason they just can't sustain that. And they had like the game against Las Vegas, last weekend. They started out really well. They played well, good energy to start the game in the first quarter. Second quarter rolls around, boom, Vegas gets free. They start getting out in transition. They start knocking down some timely threes. We saw that yesterday with Dallas. They were in that game up. They were only down by 5 at the half, and third quarter comes, which was kind of a continuation from the end of the second quarter, where Dallas just kind of got free, was able to knock down some threes, build up a lead, and just never looked back. And the players have talked about it post game. They've mentioned that one of the issues that they've been seeing out there is their transition defense. But it's just that's been just one of the glaring issues there, is not being able to sustain a consistent defensive effort for a full 40 minutes, and it's hurt them.
And I mean, you can use both the advanced statistics using Basketball Reference here. Last year's defensive rating for the Sparks was 4th best in the league. This year they are dead last, and they're allowing 108.8 points per 100 possessions. Or you could just use the basic stats of points allowed per game. Last year they allowed 77.1 points per game. That was 2nd best in the league. So far this year through 14 games, it's 87.6 points. They're allowing more than 10 points more per game so far, which, by the way, is 2nd worst in the WNBA right now. It's clear, obviously, they made some moves maybe to spark the offense and were willing to sacrifice some defense. I don't think they are getting the amount of offense they wanted, and I think they're realizing maybe they sacrificed more defense than they thought they had to sacrifice. And before we kind of really break that down here, I want to talk quickly, if you wanted to kind of maybe think about, well, if I don't believe in their defense, maybe I should look at players on the other team to do well against them offensively, you should go to prizepicks.com or download PrizePicks on your phone and use the PrizePicks app to do daily fantasy. Check out prizepicks.com and use the promo code NBA, or go to your app store and download the app today. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. They have WNBA games each and every night. There is a WNBA game, so you can look at, say, the Washington Mystics, who are coming. If you really don't believe in that LA Sparks defense, maybe you think Elena Deladon has a big night. Maybe you think Ariel Atkins can do well. Go to PrizePicks. The app is super easy to use and super simple to sign up, and check out what they have for the WNBA. Thanks to the Locked On Podcast Network. Use the promo code NBA. PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. So with this defense, Dave, what do you think can be done? There's been some kind of roster fluidity here. Kristi Toliver is kind of finally back in and getting into the fold after missing a good chunk of the first month of the season while she was still an assistant coach with the Dallas Mavericks. Where can you look for improvement if you're trying to find it when they prepare first for the Mystics tonight, but for this continuation of this 5 games and 9-day stretch?
I think that's a good point that you brought up, Kristi Toliver's return, because one of the other issues they've been having is turnovers, and they can't seem to take care of the ball either. And taking a look around the league, I think they're in the bottom half. They're one of the last 4 teams in the league in terms of turnovers per game. They're averaging.
They're turning it over 14.6 times per game. That's 10th out of 12 in the league. Not necessarily great, you would say.
And right. And I think that, that's an area that somebody like a Kristi Toliver can help in that you're adding an experienced ball handler and playmaker. I think last night against Dallas, she had 3 assists in the game and only 1 turnover. So I think that may help a little bit there. And we'll see, I think she's definitely somebody that can help this team. Again, I'm not going to say that she's the answer, to everything that's been going on with the season, but just kind of integrating her into the lineup is something that's going to help. Just having that steady hand, that steady ball handler who's going to play smart out there. She's somebody that can kind of help a little bit.
So far, she only just played for the first time against Dallas on Sunday. So how she integrates into the roster, how that happens, she only played 15 minutes in that game, but she clearly is somebody that they'll want to kind of utilize going forward. I will say, though, the part where you have to hope she maybe makes the biggest impact, especially compared to the rest of the league, is help the Sparks maybe open up the floor more. This is a team that is dead last, both in 3-point attempts and in 3-pointers made. They're shooting actually 5 less 3-pointers a game than they were a season ago and some of the moves they made this offseason was to get more outside shooting. They've added Katie Lou Samuelson. They added Lexi Brown, who are leading their team in 3-point attempts. But for the most part, this is a team that's barely been shooting the ball, and it's maybe making them easier to defend inside. Their league worst field goal percentage, even though they're league worst in field goal attempts. Part of that's the turnovers, but they're the league's best field goal shooting team percentage-wise. But when all of those shots are, for the most part, 2-point shots, and you're not shooting enough from 3, it's tough to kind of be an aggressive offense that way. Their offense is scoring more, but when you're not putting up 3-pointers or making them, it can be easy for you to lose those gaps, you would say, right? Does that feel like a thing with this team to you, Dave, as you watch them every day, is that they need to maybe be shooting more threes and spread their offense out a tiny bit more?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Kristi Toliver does help on that end. She's been a decent 3-point shooter. I do want to mention that she did start, she only played 15 minutes, but she did start yesterday against Dallas. And I think there's one area, though, that I do want to mention in terms of maybe kind of getting this offense to jumpstart a little bit. And that's, I think maybe Kristi Toliver, at least at this point of her career, while she can still help this team, is going to be more effective kind of coming off the bench now.
That's a hot take. I got to say, I'm want to hear this through.
And I do think, because there's one pairing in particular that, you know, the team themselves have also said has worked well when they play together, and that's the backcourt pairing of Jordan Canada and Chennedy Carter. And they haven't, you know, they haven't really had an opportunity to start together. I know when Chennedy was starting, that was when Jordan Canada was out briefly, you know, with that hamstring issue. But the two of them together have looked well. You know, they've played well. The team's noticed it. You know, Fred Williams has mentioned it. Nneka Ogwumike mentioned it, that they've looked good when they've played together. And so I think each time that Chennedy has gotten the start this season, she's really helped the team. You know, her minutes have just kind of fluctuated a little bit. She's coming off the bench now. I know we talked about her before, how, you know, you gave up a lot to get her. You know, she was kind of a huge acquisition, and you would kind of expect that, you know, she'd be a little bit more, I guess, I don't know if I want to say involved, but just, you know, that her minutes maybe would be a little bit more than what they are. And so I think that's something that can really help there, is to kind of to look at that pairing, look at Jordan Canada and Chennedy Carter playing together in the backcourt. And because, I mean, you at this point, you know, you got to get some results. You know, they're kind of wallowing under 500 there, and if that pairing's been pretty good. And I know, you know, you mentioned before, defensively, you know, with Chennedy Carter, but
Right.
you know, I think playing alongside somebody like Jordan Canada, you know, who's always been a pretty good defensive player, may help there.
Well,
But
that lineups, those two, you can kind of use stats.wnba.com to kind of go to two-player lineup. That lineup has played 36 minutes together, but it hasn't really looked pretty defensively, which I think is the big risk you run with those two. And that, I think, is mainly just Chennedy, to be honest, right? I think you have some pretty decent defenders, but Kennedy's growth on the defensive end isn't happening in the way probably people would like it to. And frankly, it needs to happen more to make up for what you hope she's able to bring you on the offensive end. And that's a player that can be an impact player, that has proven that at the collegiate level, even proved it so far in her pro career. I mean, so far in her pro career, she was, you know, she though has gone down in her scoring average with each season, because I think, frankly, that she's not able to play as much as she used to because her defense is so bad. She has to improve on the defensive end if she's going to be able to be an impact type of player, because you can't give up more points than you're scoring and be somebody consistently relied on in the WNBA.
no, yeah, that's true, and it does put the team, you know, in a little bit of an interesting position there, because you take a look at, you know, the other options in terms of, you know, starting in the backcourt there. You do have, you know, there's the possibility of starting Brittany Sykes again. I mean, we all know what she brings on the defensive end there. I think, you know, with Brittany Sykes, one of the issues there is, her offense has definitely come along, you know, in the past couple of years. I mean, she was always a pretty dependable slasher. I think her playmaking game is really starting to show this season. The one area that, you know, I may have had some concern with is the shooting. And, you know, we talk about, you know, how this team's really been struggling to shoot from the outside. And, you know, there have been some games where Brittany's looked pretty good, with that 3-point stroke. And then there are other games where, you know, not so much. And so, that's definitely an option there, in terms of, you know, is that trade-off, you know, is what she brings defensively to the starting lineup. Can, you know, we maybe not, we can go with some, you know, not as consistent offense, you know, in terms of shooting. But, you know, definitely, you know, I'm not so sure too. Maybe, you know, maybe Kristi Toliver ends up, you know, doing well in the starting lineup. I just, the way this roster was kind of constructed coming into the season, and based on, you know, who was on the team, I just kind of felt that, you know, maybe it was best for Kristi to come off the bench now, and, you know, to bring that veteran, her presence with the second unit there, but who knows? Maybe she actually, they do need her in the starting lineup. But I think that's just one of the things that's going to be interesting to see in these next few games here is that starting backcourt. It's kind of been rotating throughout the season. With
Well, and especially with the quick gauntlet of games, right? We're recording this Monday night for Tuesday, but on Tuesday tonight, they're playing the second of that 5 games and 9-day stretch where you're going to just run people's bodies down. They started on the road. They're home tonight. They'll be home Thursday. They're in Seattle Sunday. They're home again the following Tuesday. So they're on the road in Seattle Saturday. They'll be home again Monday. But you'll have to kind of maybe manage the minutes a little bit, which will be interesting to see. I do have a big picture question I want to ask you, but first, I do want to talk to you about Rock Auto, which has just some amazing selection and some reliably low prices. They have all the parts your car will ever need. Make sure you visit rockauto.com and tell them that Locked On and the Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast sent you. So, Dave, when you look at this team and you kind of think about how they were built, clearly they thought something wasn't right if they made the coaching change. And now they've had 2 games. They are actually, funny enough, at the fewest games played of anybody in the WNBA. In fact, some of the teams in the league have already played 18 games and are at the halfway point of their season. The Sparks are still at 14. They'll get to 18 by next Monday already because it's just a quick gauntlet here. But there is a chance for them to quickly right this ship by the halfway point next week. If you tear off 4 straight wins here, you're 9-9 and you probably feel pretty comfortable. In the meantime, you could have that flip on you right away. And maybe you go 1-3 over these next 7 days, or worse, 0-4. And all of a sudden you're now in your second straight season where you've traded away your first round pick and it's going to fall in the lottery, which perhaps is part of why Fisher had to be let go, was not necessarily for his on-court coaching, but more that his general managing, Fisher, Derek, the GM, was hurting Derek, the coach, too much to survive. So what does this team, this feels like a pretty massive week for this team is kind of where I'm going to, and they've already started it off with a loss.
No, yeah, this is definitely a big week coming up. And you mentioned that you the possibility of them, if you go 1-3, what does that look like? And honestly, these are going to be some pretty tough games. You have Washington coming in Washington, followed by, I believe it's Vegas again.
So I'll read it to you because I'm looking at it. You host Washington on Tuesday night tonight. You host the Sky, defending NBA champion, on Thursday night, and Candace Parker coming back to town. That should always have a little extra drama. You go to Seattle to take on the Storm, and then the Monday is when you host Vegas. I don't think the Sparks are going to be favored in any of those games. And if you lose them all, you're looking at 5-13 halfway through the season. Your schedule will ease up a tiny bit in the second half, but you still will have multiple games against the Sky. You'll have at least one more game against the Sky, 2 games against the Mystics, 2 games against the Sun. Some of the games they've already played where they've, played Minnesota twice already. Like, their schedule does not do them many favors, and they haven't taken care of business. That it's starting. You don't want to predict too much, but something has to flip this week. Otherwise, things start to look really bleak really quickly.
I would agree. Yeah. I mean, this really is going to be, I don't want to say that it's really like the make or break stretch. I mean, in a sense, it might be,
you might not say it. I will say it. It is the make or break stretch. I will happily lean in and say, you got to pull, and especially because you're going to start playing these home games, you've got to pull a couple of these games off if you're going to be flipping the switch. Obviously, with 8 of 12 teams making it, you don't have to be a good team or have a good record to make the playoffs, but to feel like you're even got a shot to contend, that Aces game, they've been blown out by them twice so far this season, and it really hasn't looked very pretty. That Aces game probably needs to at least feel competitive, even if you don't get a win by Monday. But how competitive can you be if you've lost another 3 games going into that?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I would say, looking at these next 4 games, it's possible that they can kind of flip something around and have a good showing, maybe pull off some wins. But I mean, it's also possible. I don't think any of us would be surprised if they end up going 1 or 3, or perhaps, dropping each of those games just based
Yeah.
on what we've seen so far this season, what we've seen to this point. They haven't really given us any indication that they're really capable of flipping a switch and getting things going. So,
And
this is definitely.
in a WNBA, again, where 8 of 12 teams make it, they still have multiple games against the Phoenix Mercury. They have multiple games against the New York Liberty. They actually still have 3 games. And those are the teams kind of in that, they'll still play the Atlanta Dream, I believe at least 1 more time. No, 2 more times. So those are the teams kind of in that 7, 8, 9, 10 range, where if the Sparks are going to make a push, they'll be closer to those teams so they can still have games later on. But it's got to start looking better on the floor. And you usually want to look good against the teams that you would ostensibly be playing against in the playoffs, which is coming up right here in this week. This week isn't a true make or break week, but it is a sign of how bad are things with this group, or are there things that you can take away that show the improvement? I feel like that's maybe as hot take as I'm willing to get for you as a beat reporter. I'm sure you're going to say a little softer that this is a week to show us something, show us the potential against some high quality teams that let us know, are you guys getting this together, or is this just happening again for a second straight year?
I think that's definitely what I'd say, is that these next 4 games are really going to tell us a lot. And if we see some improvement there, if we see maybe you might have a couple losses in there, but it's the way you lose. Like if they
Yeah.
continue to, because the past 2 losses have been pretty bad, and pretty decisive. And if that if that continues, if that pattern continues with these upcoming games, then I think we start taking a look at things and start to say, hey, maybe, yeah, here we go for a second straight season. But if there's improvement there, maybe if there's a couple losses, but the effort's there, the defense is there, the offense is there, the consistency is there, maybe, oh, we just came up short here, then I think, that does bode well in terms of things to come, or could, but I think that's pretty fair to, in that, this really is going to tell us a lot about how the rest of this season is going to go.
It's time for the Los Angeles Sparks to show improvement, if they are actually improving during this season, is probably the entire statement that we could make in a sentence. But it's true. It's time. Dave, thank you so much for taking your time here to record this on a Monday night for our Tuesday show. Are you going to be at the game tonight when they host the Washington Mystics?
I will. Yeah, I'll be there.
So where can people find work, both your tweets from the game and any work that you're going to do out of games like tonight?
You can find all my work, all my Sparks related content at The Next, and you can find me on Twitter at Dave_Yapkowitz.
That's thenexthoops.com and at thenexthoops on Twitter as well. And you can find me at Alex Simon Sports. I'm with Bay Area News Group. We've had a little bit of things going on up in the Bay Area with terms of basketball. You might hear more about some of the things I did, a little teaser here, later this week, talking with Howard Megdal. We'll see what can happen. We might have some fun. But thank you so much, Dave, for joining us today. And thank you all for listening. We hope you have a lovely Tuesday afternoon.